Good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, depending where you are. Welcome to the webinar of the Geriatric Emergency Department Collaborative. My name is Don Mulady. I'm an emergency physician at the University of Toronto in Toronto, Canada, and I'm a core faculty member with the Geriatric ED Collaborative. Today, and of course the GEDC is generously supported by the John A. Hartford Foundation and the West Health Institute. And I'm joined by a group of panelists whom I'll get to shortly. We've been trying to get to this topic of research in the Geriatric Emergency Department for over a year. As I say on every webinar, the GEDC is involved with dissemination and implementation of best practices, but we're also committed to studying the outcomes of those interventions. So research is a core part of the GEDC mission. By the end of today's webinar, you'll have met some lead researchers in the field of geriatric emergency department care. You'll have an idea of some of the important initiatives going on around the world, and you may have an idea of ways that you could get involved. Next slide, please, Heather. When you registered for this webinar, and there's a lot of you who did, over 200 registrants from around the world, we asked you this question: what do you think is the most important topic for additional research in the care of older adults in the emergency department? And your answers were all over the map, just like your presence. Next slide, please. I pulled together a non-scientific survey poll of those responses. Certainly, a very large number of them, the first three there that are bolded, where the vast majority of your responses were: we need to know more about people with dementia and other cognitive impairments while they're in the emergency department. We need to know more about delirium interventions and delirium screening, and we need to know more about falls assessment. But a lot of you are interested in a lot of other research questions, including, brand new topics like the impact of technology and artificial intelligence, care of diverse populations, transitions of care, which is relevant for our next webinar. So there's a lot of things that we don't know enough about in this field, and we hope that some of those questions are already being answered, and we'll get a better idea of them. As we get started, I would like to hear, we would all like to hear where you're calling in from and what your role is. So please open the chat box, make sure that the little blue bar is set to everyone so everyone can see, and tell us where you're calling in from and what your role there. And if you're involved in research, that would be interesting to know too. Next slide, please. The Geriatric ED Collaborative is an organization of like-minded individuals and emergency departments focused on the high-quality care of older adults. We are interested in dissemination of best practices. They're supporting groups to implement them and then researching the outcomes. If you are interested in those topics, and I hope you are, and if you share that vision, please consider joining the GEDC. It's free. It's just a way that you would be in more contact with us, and we could support you even better. Take out your phones and access the QR code there. Next slide, please. These are our panelists for today, and I'm delighted to have them all with us, and really pleased they've taken an hour out of their busy days to be here with us. Chris Carpenter is an emergency physician at Mayo Clinic, where he's the Vice Chair of Innovation and Implementation. For 2 decades, he's been one of the leading researchers in the field of geriatric emergency medicine, and you'll have seen his name on many papers. Likewise, Ula Hwang is an emergency physician and a professor at New York University Grossman School of Medicine, and like Chris, has had several decades as a researcher in the field. She even wrote the original paper called, using the term, the Geriatric Emergency Department. Shan Liu is an emergency physician and a researcher at Massachusetts General Hospital and an associate professor at Harvard Medical School. And from far away on the other side of the Atlantic, Christian Nickel is the Vice Chair of Emergency Medicine at the University Hospital Basel, Switzerland, which is a level 1 accredited geriatric ED. He's a founding member of the geriatric section of the European Society for Emergency Medicine. And with his research, he attempts to improve the care for older adults in the ED. So you've got a panel of some of the leading researchers in the field. Now's your time to ask a question. If you have a specific thing that you're wondering about, wanting to know about, put that specific question into the chat now or at any time while our panelists are speaking. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Chris. Next slide, please. And Chris is going to take us through his experience of geriatric emergency medicine research. Chris, over to you.
Thank you, Don. So in these next few minutes of the GEDC webinar, I wanted to provide historical context around the roots of geriatric emergency medicine in North America. So get in your time machine and go back to 2002. There's just a few of us sitting around a table at Society for Academic Emergency Medicine that was in St. Louis that year. Those of us around the table understood the demographic imperative of aging baby boomers and were surprised at the relative paucity of emergency medicine geriatric-related published research to support education and clinical protocols, compared with airway management and resuscitation research, which in those days seemed to be in abundance as they are today. Next slide, please. In the intervening years, there's been a veritable explosion in education resources for clinicians wishing to learn more about geriatric emergency medicine. Illustrated here, numerous geriatric EM textbooks now exist. And for a while, a new one was appearing every year if you look at 2014, 2015, 2016. So much more than existed back in 2002. Next slide. In addition to textbooks, online curricula were created for physicians and nurses and others in the EM healthcare space to obtain CME credit for various aspects of geriatric emergency care and management. Geri EM Online, created by Don Milady, was one of the first and can be found on the GEDC website. Next slide, please. Since a new generation of learners value alternative methods for knowledge acquisition beyond textbooks and journal articles, podcasts emerged to fill a niche within this educational space. The textbooks, online CME modules, and podcasts each depends upon a robust foundation of published research for objective proof of concept. Next slide. Yet, as the number of individuals interested in geriatric emergency medicine expanded, other stakeholders, including journal editors, insurers, funders, hospital leadership, and credentialing bodies, challenged advocates to develop a compelling and pragmatic research basis upon which to justify educational lessons, guidelines, and accreditation efforts. The American Geriatric Society recognized a need to prioritize age-friendly research across specialties 20 years ago and supported the New Frontiers research agenda setting process. Emergency medicine was among the specialties included in this effort to identify the highest priority geriatric research questions pertinent to our specialty. The first version of this effort was published in 2005, and an update with 63 questions appeared in 2008. Next slide. Shortly thereafter, a wider group that included the new Geriatric EM interest group at the Society for Academic Emergency Medicine, as well as the RAND Corporation, expanded the research prioritization effort along with NIA funders. And this grabbed some attention that generated some funding opportunities. Next slide. Yet we know that designing research, obtaining funding for that research, analyzing results, and publishing those findings often takes years through the process of developing a novel idea, obtaining funding to support the research work, submitting the work for publication to increasingly competitive journals, indexing those results in electronic search engines like PubMed, and then incorporating those findings into reviews, clinical practice guidelines, and textbooks, and then actually implementing into practice, which the Institute of Medicine estimates takes 17 years for 14% of evidence to reach the bedside. So the challenges are real and not unique to geriatric EM. Meanwhile, 10,000 baby boomers began turning 65 every day in 2011. Next slide. I can attest firsthand about the expanding number of geriatric EM submissions to the Journal of the American Geriatric Society and Academic Emergency Medicine over the last decade, because I get to review most of them. More objectively, this open access study that is illustrated here sought to quantify the growth of geriatric EM research over the past 30 years and seems to demonstrate a rapid growth in this area through an unexpected, there was an unexpected decline around the time of COVID. The red bars here represent citations of select geriatric emergency medicine publications, and the black line is the raw number of published manuscripts that meet the author's criteria definition of geriatric EM. This background, I hope, provides historical context for the presentations to follow by Ula Hwang, Shan Liu, and Christian Nickel, and really shows you how we started and how rapidly we've grown, particularly over the last 15 years. That's what I've got. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Just picking up on a few things, I noticed you mentioned that New Frontiers project. I can't remember, 15 years ago or more. What were the main research questions that were being targeted then? And from your experience, how have things changed over the years? And what are the new topics that people are interested in that were not so much the case, say, 15 or 20 years ago?
Well, the New Frontiers split the recommendations into level A, level B, or level C, with level A being the highest priority research questions. And some examples will resonate with folks today. Emerge Med 2 was one of the recommendations. Randomized control trials are needed to assess the effectiveness of interventions such as educational models or standardized protocols for improving quality of care of older ED patients. Another one, Emerge Med 11, was a level A recommendation. Controlled intervention trials are needed to determine whether the detection and management of functional impairment in older adults affects outcomes. So these resonate. Those are still largely unknowns in our area, and certainly you don't have a large body of randomized controlled trials to show proof of concept for much of what we do in geriatric EM. Doesn't mean it's not coming, but we're still building that bridge. As far as what was missed in the New Frontiers, I think some things that your survey highlighted, missing questions about artificial intelligence, never crossed our mind in 2008. Health equity concerns, just for some reason, was not on the agenda then. And in the boarding issues, although boarding occurred back in 2008, it wasn't front and center like it is today. So we really didn't have any boarding questions among the New Frontiers questions.
And since you say you read a lot of research papers in your capacity as associate editor, what are you seeing a lot of these days? What are the main things that are coming in, and are they addressing those issues?
I think that the biggest volume increase that I've seen in the last 5 years would be on issues including delirium, dementia management, and falls. And that corresponds, I think, to the funding that's coming out of the National Institute of Health in the United States. More recently, like in the last 1 to 1.5 years, a tremendous amount of AI research is emerging in terms of, since it's so hard to enroll these patients and to change practice and to do randomized control trials, how much of this work can artificial intelligence do for us? And we're seeing an increasing body of that evidence, even though we're still developing the foundational science to really show that it's unbiased research.
So in what way can artificial intelligence help answer those questions? By using data that is already available?
Yeah, it uses the electronic medical records. And instead of having a nurse or physician do a screen for dementia or delirium or fall risk, it scours the emergency medical record, both the day of the ED visit and all the past hospitalizations or visits or office visits, and then it spits out risk of falls and gives that to the physician, spits out risk of dementia or delirium that's not previously diagnosed, and it gives that to the physician with no extra effort from the physician or the nurse team.
But then moving beyond just that immediate clinical encounter, is that publishable data? Can you turn that into something that can be new knowledge and can be shared with others that other people can make decisions on?
Yeah, that's the manuscripts that are being submitted, is showing that this AI works in the settings in which it's being conducted. And we've got some examples with falls and with delirium. Ula may have some work with dementia as well. And so those works are being published, yes.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned a key topic for most researchers, and that is funding. How would you say the funding environment is changing in these last 10 years with regard to research specifically around geriatric emergency medicine?
Don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but my gut sense is that the sheer number of dollars that are going towards acute unscheduled care, emergency medicine for geriatric issues has increased over my career lifespan. I can say with confidence that the number of geriatric EM physicians sitting on study sections has increased remarkably, so that those who are reviewing the research really understand the context in which it's being applied, and the history and what has worked, what hasn't, and why this proposal might or might not be novel. My first couple of years serving on study sections, there was nobody else on the study section that had that perspective. And many of them were cardiologists or like-minded physicians who haven't spent any time in the emergency department in 25 years. So not really sure what our daily workflow is or what we're capable of in emergency medicine. So I think our representation at study section levels has increased.
Maybe when the time comes, I'll pitch that question to Christian to get a bit of an international perspective. I don't know what's happening in other places in the world. So thanks a lot for that, Chris. And maybe we'll move on to Ula. Do you want to go back into the slides, please, Heather? And while we're doing that, I just remind people that if you are sending questions that you want answered, please try to toggle the little blue thing to everyone, not just the panelists. So over to you, Ula, for a different perspective on geriatric ED research.
Great. Thanks so much, everyone. So I'm going to shift a little bit and talk about, I do see, I'm seeing some of the questions coming in, and I do sense that for many, you're all, you have a much more of a clinical focus and maybe not specifically serve as a researcher. And so I'm here to talk and say that when I introduce myself, I don't introduce myself, hi, I'm Ula Hwang, I'm a researcher. I'm actually an emergency physician that's a wannabe geriatrician. So I really I'm an emergency physician, and then by night I play a researcher. And as Don mentioned, I'm currently at NYU because they gave me the opportunity to do geriatric research in emergency departments. But I said, well, if there's no geriatric emergency care, how am I going to do research there? And so they gave me the opportunity also to be the medical director for geriatric emergency medicine, whereby we can now implement quality improvement initiatives and this care focused on older adults. I will say a little bit more, like in terms of my interest specifically on older adults, it stemmed actually from what I observed as a clinician. All the way back when I was a resident, I was initially interested in emergency department crowding, and I saw the impact it had on our ability to be clinicians in delivering care. Back then when we had paper charts, you'd pick up charts based on like the order of when you would see patients, and I'd be picking up charts of patients who had been in our waiting room 8, 10 plus hours. And you'd call out, not really expecting them still to be there, but they were still there because the emergency department was the only place that they could get the care needed. Fast forward 20 years later, we are still dealing with crowding. Tomorrow, there will be a ED boarding summit down in DC talking exactly about the challenges of crowding. And I'll speak specifically about the impact it has on older adults. So there's an opportunity to really take our experiences and what we observe and the care that we deliver. For me, I chose to focus on the vulnerable older patient and really move forward. How can we advance the care that they receive, really bring in and address the special care needs of older patients? Next slide. So this is an example of some of the research I'm going to call it in quotes, research that I've done, because I'm not a basic scientist. I'm not running animal models. I'm not doing studies on emergency care for older patients by studying cells and et cetera. I'm not doing randomized clinical trials either. My work is really based a lot on observational data, and data is the key part of a lot of this, but many of us have access to these data. And so this most recent study, which we published just in this past July, on the impact of geriatric emergency medicine specialists' interventions on final ED disposition, was featured in the Journal of the American Geriatric Society. We're really lucky. The piece, it made the cover of JAGS. I think, click on to the next slide. Ina Cohen, a brilliant master's graduate that came to work for me as a data analyst and is now getting her PhD, used generative AI. So here's another example of how AI can really help you, move your work forward, and shows on the left, a crowded ED that may not be very friendly for older adults. And then on the right, we have an age-friendly emergency department. And so the paper itself, not specifically about this picture, but was really a QI initiative that we did at Yale New Haven Hospital, working with geriatrics. They had geriatric APPs, nurse practitioner and PAs, come down and provide consults on our older ED patients. This was not funded by any institute or any organization. This was a QI initiative that we were able to then write up as an emulated clinical trial and demonstrate that patients who were seen by these GEMS specialists compared to a matched patient of similar risks, but not seen by a GEMS patient, had different disposition outcomes. And in this case, demonstrated they were less likely to be admitted, more likely to be discharged, and as an interim, more likely to actually experience an ED observation stay. And so that's really probably to facilitate those care transitions. And so you can turn QI research into, or QI initiatives into research. Next slide. We had the question a moment ago, well, how do we show these kinds of things? And this is an example of, so I also am at the VA. It's very important for me because the VA provides an opportunity really to address a very vulnerable group of patients. The VA, as the country's largest integrated healthcare system, disproportionately sees more older veterans in their emergency departments than other settings. And here we took VA data, again, not a funded research study, but we looked at the number of veterans across the United States who had a dementia diagnosis, and that's the red line. And what we demonstrated was, on the blue line, the number of cumulative emergency department visits that they make in the months before and after that first dementia diagnosis. And what you see is a spike in the number of ED visits in just the 6 to 12 months before they're officially diagnosed with dementia. This is just using data that's already in the system and pulling it out and telling a story, highlighting an opportunity. In this case, I think it highlights two opportunities. The first one being there's an opportunity to do something while these patients are in the emergency department and potentially change their trajectories of care, change what they receive in terms of maybe they won't come back to the emergency department if we get them the right care processes. The second opportunity here, specifically when we talk about dementia care, is the opportunity for earlier detection. We're not going to diagnose dementia in the emergency department because we're not trained to do that, and we don't have the resources to do that, but we can recognize or detect if someone might have undiagnosed dementia and potentially then refer them for that additional care and evaluation that might now allow for earlier detection and recognition. So opportunities, again, to really leverage some of these data to tell a story, to highlight an opportunity, and to change care. Next slide. Next slide.
There may be a lag on your screen.
So in a moment, you'll see.
Heather, I think you could go back to the previous slide. On the screen for me currently is the GEAR website, the Journal of Geriatric Emergency Medicine. Is it? Ula, are you there? Oh, I think we've lost Ula.
I can continue for Ula. She was going to, I think, present to the group.
GEAR is your part to Chris.
Yeah, and I think she wanted to talk about the Geriatric Emergency Applied Research Network, which was NIA funded and has given us the ability to fund 3 cohorts of 3 early career investigators in geriatric emergency medicine per year, focused on dementia care in the emergency department setting. The GEAR project, we just had our meeting with our oversight board earlier today, has, I think, been a tremendous success in jumpstarting this area of research, which for many years was difficult to get funding from the NIH for a variety of reasons. And the GEAR website has a wealth of resources, including research, asynchronous learning modules on different methods of recruiting and maintaining older adult populations in your study setting, as well as some implementation science modules and working with community representatives in geriatric projects. Next slide.
Just before, could you just fill us in a little bit more on how this geriatric emergency care applied research network started, Chris?
Yeah, we had some meetings with the NIA probably 6, 7 years ago, and they were interested in why some of that history that I had presented earlier, why there's such a paucity of research and an acceleration of research as the demographics of an aging population came to us. And we told them some stories about our experiences with grants that we had put in unsuccessfully and some biases that the study sections had with no EM representation. And the NIA was able to really generate these opportunities for us to get funding for the GEAR network. Sorry, Ula, I'll let you take over. Oh, is she frozen?
She's frozen again. Poor
Okay.
frozen Eula. Keep going, Chris.
Okay.
Talk about
next slide.
their involvement.
Eula, are you back? So we have an opportunity coming up to learn more from others doing dementia research outside of emergency medicine. And this is a grand round opportunity that's 8 days from now. There's a link there to sign up for it if you're interested. And the Impact Laboratory leaders, Susan Mitchell and Vince Moore, are going to be telling us the story of the Impact Laboratory and their vision of how emergency medicine can really begin to further expand the world of pragmatic trials in dementia care. As I said in my presentation, RCTs, randomized controlled trials, are exceedingly rare, and there's a lot of reasons for that. The Impact Laboratory has been a tremendous success in this area of frontline dementia care and getting the care to the patients today who have dementia, rather than working for a cure that may be 20 or 30 years away. And I think this is an opportunity for GEAR to really collaborate with the Impact Laboratory and learn more from them. Eula, are you back?
I think Eula's back. Eula, Chris picked
Yeah.
up your absence and gave us a good account of the beginnings of GEAR and what you're doing. Could you maybe give an idea to the audience of like how somebody listening to this could be involved in GEAR or benefit from the work that you're doing within GEAR?
Yeah, sorry about my connectivity issues. I'm on my way to that boarding summit, and so I'm at the airport doing this webinar, which is unfortunate. So I think two ways to answer your question of how you can be involved with GEAR or benefit from GEAR is Chris actually is part of our core GEAR leadership, has set up some incredible training modules and just modules in like, well, how do you engage with older adults and how do you engage with older adults that may have cognitive impairment, the issues with regard to recruitment, retention, engagement of patients, implementation of studies and projects and considerations. These are all available as modules that are, some of them are short, some of them are longer. We have several of our actual webinars, sometimes featuring some of the speakers available there too. And as mentioned before, really excited about the grand rounds that'll be taking place next week. You do have to register so you can get the link to go to the WebEx platform. And so do take a look at that, and there's opportunities there. I do want to actually, one of the points that I wanted to make that actually ties back to what Chris was talking about with the new frontiers and then now GEAR moving forward with research priorities is I think another distinction that GEAR has done is to engage not just a group or a cadre of emergency physician researchers, but now many of the GEAR priorities really pulled together task forces that brought voices to patients, care partners, geriatricians, social workers, pharmacists, nurses, all of the above, because I think what we really know and understand is that geriatric emergency care isn't delivered in a silo, but it's really a team effort. And so really bringing in the voices of what matters to the patient when it comes to research, you'll be surprised. What we think is important as researcher for research as an emergency physician may not be the same thing of what a patient or a family member thinks. And so really trying to listen and incorporate their voice and perspective into this research is one of the key things that we've tried to do.
Do you have some examples of that where you've had research products from allied health professionals making a difference?
Yes. Yeah, so I think on one of the earlier slides that Chris showed with the GEAR network, there was a picture of like all these people at the bottom. That was the first GEAR consensus conference.
Slide, Heather.
Yep, actually the one with the people. Yeah, so that was the first consensus conference, and I think we had close to 50 people attend and participate and really bring voice to the geriatric emergency care research priorities around the 5 M's of age-friendly care. So delirium, falls, medication, what matters with regards to care transitions, and finally, elder mistreatment. So those were the research priorities there. And then with GEAR 2.0, we did it all over again, but during COVID. So we held this conference virtually. The background that Chris and I have, this was like our kind of Brady Bunch Hollywood Squares-esque background that we used for our consensus conference that had over 70 people over 2 days. We had 5 persons living with dementia, that's how they identified, participate in this 2-day-long virtual conference. And we made it we gave them the supports and enabled them to be able to participate. I think the last thing that I would say, whereby there, as an example of the product, is we fund research studies. We've put out pilot funding opportunities focused on these research priorities, and the reviewers who selected those studies included patients, included persons living with dementia, included care partners who also had a voice to say, well, we think this study is more important to be funded rather than that study. In the end, it turned out many of their priorities were very aligned with what the researchers thought, but we had that chance to incorporate their voice.
Great. Well, so my face is in the very back of that photo, and I can recall vividly how lively the discussions were by bringing together many different stakeholders, divided up into tables, and really getting a lot of different perspectives on all of the topics that you outlined. It was terrific. Okay, thanks a lot, Ula, for coming and going, and I hope you're back to stay. Next slide, please, Heather. And I think we're going to move over to the other side of the Atlantic and to our special guest, Kristen Nickel. Because we anticipated some internet problems, Kristen chose to pre-record his video, and fortunately he's here also, so he's available to make comments after the fact. So we'll listen to the video first.
Hello everybody, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to speak at this webinar. I'm living and working in a country of 8.8 million inhabitants in which emergency medicine is not yet a primary specialty. My journey in geriatric emergency medicine research is a journey of 15 years in which I have made a lot of mistakes. I'm sure you're familiar with the 5 M's framework, which has been presented in this webinar series a multitude of times. I failed a patient regarding his matters most. He was aged 87 years, and he was presenting to the ED after a ground level fall. His history taking was lengthy and somewhat painful. After a while, I lost patience and I asked him, "So, did you lose consciousness, yes or no?" And he answered, "This is a yes or no hospital." I was very unhappy with my performance, but this patient encounter prompted a study, a flash mob study on matters most, in 7 countries, 66 hospitals, in which we included patients over a period of 48 hours. And these 48 hours were the most stimulating conversations that I ever had. The sad news about this was that the treating team was not aware of what mattered to their patients in about 50% of the cases. When I applied for a job interview in Basel, my now boss asked me, "What are the most challenging symptoms to work up in the ED?" I thought I was a big 5 virtuoso, but I had problems with the workup of weakness, and I felt like a beginner on that piano. And he agreed, and we studied in the Basel non-specific complaints studies and found that these patients were at risk of adverse outcomes. These findings were reproduced by other groups all over the world. Older patients do not read the textbooks, must have said a very, very smart person. I personally believe that we need to rewrite them, e.g., for a nonspecific disease presentation, which is in fact specific for older, frail adults. When there was literature emerging on under-triage of older adults in the ED setting, I thought this was not a problem in our setting. But in fact it was. 20% of our older adults were under-triaged despite a teaching intervention that showed that factual knowledge was not the problem. But it increased with age, and we speculated that some kind of age bias or even ageism played a role here. So I learned that there are no simple solutions for more complex problems. When looking at acute mental status changes, we realized that a formal delirium screening was necessary because informal delirium ratings were insufficient. So we developed the modified confusion assessment method for the emergency department based on Sharon Inouye's confusion assessment method and validated it against a gold standard, which were geriatricians. Unfortunately, about the same time, several other tools were developed which were, in fact, sort of comparable to ours. So I thought maybe we should have all worked together and would have done that more efficiently. Now, when looking at 50 years of geriatric emergency medicine, I like to believe that when geriatric emergency medicine task forces for USEM and IFEM were founded, there seems to be some kind of acceleration regarding these achievements, exemplified by these circles. When triage during the COVID pandemic was a topic, we thought that chronological age was not a very good parameter to base decisions on. This is why we implemented the clinical frailty scale in our ED in order to deliver appropriate and potentially holistic care. We also found that the CFS had prognostic properties that held up to 1 year. Several people have discussed that outcomes are determined by both the degree of frailty on the x-axis, but also on disease injury or a disease severity or injury severity. And this visualization of Simon Moyart is in fact true when looking at our own data. In fact, outcomes are determined by the degree of frailty and disease or injury severity. So, therefore, I think we need to consider geriatric urgency already at the front door, and even there, at the front door, we can make prognostic estimates. Another flash mob looked at frailty prevalence in Europe, and we found that 40% of older adults presenting to emergency department in Europe were frail. So we sort of started with a Utstein-like database. But likely the most important aspect is that we need to speak the same language across different settings. So here are 15 years of geriatric emergency medicine research at our institution, which was accredited as a gold level geriatric emergency department in 2024. But we really do not know what happened to our interventions that we started many, many years ago. Are they washed away? So this is currently investigated in an implementation science project. In summary, please learn from my mistakes. We need to rewrite the textbooks. There are no simple solutions for complex problems. International teamwork can move mountains, and sustainability should be formally investigated. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Christian. That was terrific and very beautiful slides to attest to your role as an artist. I like the way you kind of demonstrated that a lot of your research stuff, and this is the same message from Ula, has grown out of your own specific clinical experiences, the under triage at your place, weakness, confusion, and that seems to be where the best kind of research comes from. I think of all the things that you mentioned, one that caught my mind was this whole flash mob methodology, which I think is not something that has been reproduced in North America. Could you tell us a little bit more about like what a flash mob is and flash mob research and how you conducted it?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. So the flash mob methodology is a very elegant method, in my opinion, to rapidly investigate clinical questions in several settings at the same time. As we learned earlier, the research process is really taking long, up to 17 years. So in order to speed this up, the flash mob research was invented. And the father of flash mob research is a colleague from Holland, Jelmer Alsma. And basically, maybe I could use the example of the Matters Most study. What we did was in a core research team, that was the Safer at Home Consortium, which is a European research consortium, we came up with the idea to investigate what matters most to patients who are admitted to the hospital. Then we had local ambassadors in these different centers that were responsible to coordinate the study locally, and they had to mobilize the mob of data collectors who are actually performing the measurements. So things that I learned from this kind of research: the question needs to be simple and attractive. The research material to be used, like the case report forms, they need to be very, very easy because the collectors are not professional researchers often. But the advantages are that the recruitment is very short, that we have a lot of data created simultaneously, the analysis time will be short, and the costs are basically very low.
So does that mean that that a community hospital could have been part of the flash mob group? Or
Absolutely. So we used social media and professional societies to inform people that we were undertaking that study, and we got good interest.
And Shan has put into the chat, just wondering, so this was a multinational all across Europe, many different sites. Where did is this an expensive model or not? And where did the funding for it come from?
That's a great question. I think, so most of the work was done by a PhD student, and she was funded, and all the local ambassadors did this essentially for free.
And there's another interesting question from my Canadian colleague here, Dr. Lapointe Shaw, about ethics boards and legal review when you're involving many different sites. What kind of barriers did that put up?
So we started with a mothership, basically, and got ethical approval first in Holland, and then we went to the different countries, for example, Denmark or Switzerland, and got ethical approval based on the mother ethical board approval. And it worked.
Good. It certainly sounds like a promising thing that as far as I know, is not frequently used, and accounts for a lot of heterogeneity in populations, gives you a broad perspective of what's happening all over a lot of different places. We'll look forward to hearing more about that, but for now I'm going to turn this over to Shan Liu, our last expert here, from Massachusetts General, the director of a fellowship in geriatric emergency medicine research. She's going to tell us about her experiences and growth as a Geri EM researcher.
Thank you so much, Dr. Milady. So I'll mainly cover 4 points, which is just my story for how I became a geriatric emergency medicine researcher. And then really what I'm focusing on now, the majority of my time is how to update the geriatric ED guidelines. And this tool is really meant to help clinicians improve care for the patient at the bedside. And then I'll just touch briefly about the importance of mentorship. I think all of us on this panel really feel strongly that it's important to grow the next generation of researchers. And really, finally, just want to make the point that clinicians will always be central to everyone on this panel's work, because whenever you implement something, you need to have clinicians that will give you feedback, like, why didn't this work? Or how does this happen on the ground? And how can we actually translate what we're doing in our research to the bedside? So it's really a two-way street. So briefly, I'll just go into my journey of being a geriatric emergency medicine researcher. Like Ula, in fact, I followed Ula in her career. I started looking at boarding and crowding. And that was because as a resident, I didn't feel like I was giving good care. And that became such an issue for me that I actually went back to grad school after my residency and got a doctorate in public health, mainly to garner the skills to be able to do better research to prove how adverse events were occurring in this population of patients who were boarding in the ED. And so this was something that took up 10 years of my career at the beginning, was actually trying to demonstrate how patients who are boarding in our emergency department missed medications, they missed antibiotics, and basically we didn't give adequate care. And then I transitioned, like Dr. Hwang, to geriatrics, largely because I thought the people who were most vulnerable, like what Dr. Hwang said, were the geriatric patients. And I also saw at this time that there was a growth in geriatric emergency medicine research, really led by people like Dr. Hwang, Dr. Carpenter, and Dr. Nickel, all of whom were really generous to allow me into their network and allow me to collaborate with them. And so I think this group of geriatric emergency researchers have really grown because our leaders have really set the tone of really supporting one another and really growing a whole specialty so that we can do a better job of improving the care of geriatric patients. So I transitioned from crowding into falls and did for about 10 years, have been working on how to improve the care of patients who have fallen, who come to the ED. And I think the mantra is typically my colleagues want to rule out injury. They want to make sure that the patient doesn't need to be admitted for syncope. And then there's the disposition question of, can this patient go home or not? But as many of us all know, it's so much more complicated than that. Those are the questions that typically happen in the emergency department, but we really need to expand our assessment of our patients such that we really assess their fall risk, understand that frailty is key to a lot of these issues. And if we never address them, then the patient's going to come back, maybe next week, next month, certainly probably within the next year for another fall if we never get to the bottom of it. And I give you an example of how research has been important. So we designed a study where we referred our patients to a clinic and none of them showed up. So we had maybe 40 or 50 patients who were supposed to go to a rehab clinic, and we found out that 0. So like nobody showed up in this intervention. And we actually, as researchers, called them and said, what happened? And they would tell you, they'd said, well, I still am in pain, or it's too hard to get there and I can't get there. And so it's not convenient. And so we realized that implementation is very difficult. We may know that it's important to actually have a clinic and have follow-up and have interventions, but if you don't ask patients, why they, if they can get there, would they be interested? Then we're bound to have interventions fail. And so that's why I think it's very important. We may think when we design studies that we know how, why wouldn't a patient want to follow up and manage their risk, their fall risk? But if we don't actually do and understand how to implement it, then many of our interventions will fail. And so more recently, as far as Don had asked me what other projects I'm working on, I've gone back to looking at boarding and hallway among geriatric patients, because this question from a qualitative viewpoint has actually really never been answered. So we've been studying patients. We've had 45 patients who've been in the ED that are geriatric patients, and we're interviewing them and seeing what their experience is like. And no surprise, it's horrible. People say that, it's horrible to be waiting overnight and sleeping in the hallway. And caregivers see their loved ones waiting in the hallway to be admitted to the hospital. So we try to actually advocate for our patients by actually publishing this kind of research and using their quotes and their words to be able to make a point. As far as how I got involved with the Geriatric ED guidelines, when I was the president-elect of the Academy of Geriatric Emergency Medicine, we wanted to think about updating the geriatric guidelines that Dr. Hwang and Dr. Carpenter had published in 2014. And long story short, with the generous funding of West Health and Johnny Hartford and Dr. Hwang, we've been able to work for the last 4 years to try to update this using a rigorous method called the GRADE methodology. And so we're doing systematic reviews and then writing recommendations through the evidence to knowledge transition or decision, where we actually will come up with recommendations about many of the questions that you asked: delirium, falls, palliative care, frailty, dementia, and elder abuse, and delirium. So this has involved 70 emergency providers, ranging from physicians to occupational physical therapists, nurses, and pharmacists. And it's been very much an international effort. So Dr. Nichols from Switzerland comes late in his day to our meetings. We have people from Thailand who come and try to keep up on email. But all of this is to say that we've had 5 systematic reviews that have been published. 3 of them on delirium, 1 on frailty is a scoping review, and then the last 4 on delirium, and then 2 other ones on medication safety have just been submitted, and 2 other ones on falls are in the near final form to be submitted. And ultimately, we'll have guidelines that will be published. But what we need are people like you who are at the bedside, who are heroes working in the ED, who can help us do a better job of implementing these guidelines. So again, because we can write these guidelines, we can summarize and synthesize the best evidence. But what we need are people who can give us feedback on is this recommendation something we can easily implement? Is it going to be practical? So we need your feedback when these get published. So please let us know how this can be implemented on the ground. I was also asked to talk about fellowships, and I'll briefly just say that we have a geriatric emergency medicine fellowship, and I think all of us feel like it's important to mentor. So I've had 4 research fellows, 1 clinical emergency medicine fellow, and all of us feel like it's very important to grow the next generation of researchers. And again, I probably just have 30 seconds left. Our work is really important because we all are clinicians, first and foremost, and really want to improve care at the bedside. So in essence, it's important to answer the questions that are relevant to clinicians. And most importantly, really understanding how we can actually answer questions, but also what are the barriers to implementing the things that we are doing research on. So I will put my email in the chat box, but thank you to each and every one of you for all the work that you do. And again, if there are things that we can do as researchers, we would love to hear from you all who are on the front lines about what is most relevant.
Thanks, Shan. And there are a couple of questions which I'll just channel. One that I'm thinking about is of these initial systematic reviews that you've done to try to update the geriatric ED guidelines. Are there some headline news in there of things that we now know that we didn't necessarily know before? And maybe specifically, Fred Murphy is wondering about physiotherapy assessment of falls in the emergency department. I don't know if that's one of the things that you have ready yet.
So actually, Dr. Lauren Sutherland of the Ohio State just sent me the data because we're doing a systematic review on that. Unfortunately, we can't do a meta-analysis at this point, or we're trying, because all of the studies are very different, but it does seem to show that we don't have quite, so one systematic review that we're doing is whether multi-factorial interventions actually improve recurrent fall rates or decrease recurrent fall rates. And we almost make it, we almost reach significance, but not quite. So definitely a trend to doing, having EDs do multifactorial assessments. And then for physical therapy, hard to do right now from what we're looking at in our systematic review of doing a big meta-analysis. But it seems to be in certain studies, in certain situations, physical therapy does seem to make sense. So right now we're going to literally look at all the data because we just are collecting it right now and finishing that analysis. And then we'll step to the guideline phase of it and actually come up with a recommendation of should all EDs actually have physical therapy assess their patients. And so, stay tuned. We'll come up with that. It'll be a rigorous process, but we'll publish something addressing that very question.
Good, thanks, Shan. Okay, we are coming up to the top of the hour, sadly. I'm just going to check with Aaron Malsh, our executive director, if there are any questions that have come in through the chat that we could address.
I think most of them have been addressed by the panelists, so thank you. There's one that kind of leads up to research. I know that Ting Pun asks, how can QI projects be used as pilot data for doing CER research?
Ula, it was you who was talking most about quality improvement and projects and turning quality improvement into publishable, shareable knowledge. Do you want to take that?
Yeah, so I think I must not have seen the question when my link dropped. So I think if CER research, I think they must be referring to comparative effectiveness research. So I think many of these QI studies really serve as the backdrop for observational studies. And these observational studies, in essence, can now compare. In the case of some of the studies that we've done, you take these QI initiatives and you really need to track which patients are receiving your initiative or intervention. And you need to find a comparative group that maybe doesn't receive that intervention. And then you compare them with propensity score matching, entropy balance, many other types of things. And that, in essence, ends up, depending on what the outcome is that you're looking at the comparative effectiveness of that intervention or the QI protocol or initiative that you did on a particular outcome. In many ED studies, the outcomes most commonly studied are utilization outcomes, so were they admitted, were they discharged? Some studies can study the costs of care, and so we've done that. Some have looked at lengths of stay. In a moment, you're going to see a link to many papers that were selected as these are examples of Geri ED comparative effectiveness or QI studies that have been conducted that really have demonstrated its impact on geriatric emergency department outcomes.
Thanks, Ula. And Heather, while we're just wrapping up, could you go back into the slides so we could get to those resources? As always, this presentation will be on the GEDC website as of tomorrow or the next day. You'll be able to access the slides, the discussion, and all of the resources that have been mentioned. Next few slides, we have encapsulated the various take-home points, maybe, Heather, before that, I think. Yeah, so each of our four, stop on the Ula ones. All of our panelists have put together a few of their main take-home points. I would just draw your attention to this one in particular which possibly could be copied into the chat. These are what Ula put together as the top papers showing the impact of interventions that we are currently doing. I think that might provide some ammunition and support and resources for those of you who are trying to institute change at your place. So we are right at the top of the hour. I'll let you review those take-home points at your leisure. Next slide to our next webinar. We're taking a short break until February 3rd. It'll be midwinter, at least up here in Toronto by that time. That will be, we'll be looking at transitions of care, mostly from emergency departments to long-term care or aged care or residential care sites, back and forth. And this is part of a series that we're going to be developing over 2025, looking at the new measures in the United States permitting hospitals to publicly report their activity in the area of 4 interventions that improve care of older people, including identifying what matters most and improving transitions of care to the community. So please join us on February 3rd, and you can register as of today. Next slide, please. And we'll just move right on from there. And a reminder that you can take out your phone and join us in the GEDC. Final slide, please. Thanks to John A. Hartford Foundation and West Health Institute, and particularly to our 4 panelists who all have very busy lives doing a lot of other valuable work. And we really appreciate Chris and Ula and Christian and Shan taking an hour out of their days to share their knowledge with us. With that, we'll bring this webinar to a close, and thank you very much for being here.